Origin Just Home Studio Breaks, and this is the 9 types of biblical angels explained, part 2, I guess. In the first part, we saw the terrifying ones, apparently. Yeah, seraphims, cherubims, thrones, which might as well be fucking planets. I love that one. I love everything about this. I love how deep all this goes. I love the imagination behind it. All the creativity behind it, not the imagination, creativity behind it. I like the scale of things, right? I like how the vision of God and everything around it is just like shown as like some. Not everything can be comprehended by humans because humans are fragile and things like that. I love all that. So okay. First of all, there are, as like he said, like there is no rule like who's more powerful and who's not. These are just their roles. But I like to think that like closest to God must be the most powerful one. That's the reason why they are so big that humans see them, perceive them that way, like burning and everything. Seraphims, basically burning ones and things like that, right? The thrones, the true form of them is just like this kind of ball type of things and things like that, because it's really hard for human to process them because they're that powerful. I like to think that, but who knows? So heavenly rulers, right? I'm guessing these are the one who's like these are the one who just have both roles, right? Who can be in the heavens but also also on the ground, right? Somebody told me that the angel Gabriel, archangel Gabriel is like really powerful. He's the one who defeated Satan and thrown him back type of thing, right? He's the one who went to the Mary and talked about this Jesus related things, basically. So I'm guessing that Gabriel must be that powerful. So maybe there is like chance like this is based on roles, and all of them are equally powerful, but their power is based on like what is the needed from there, I guess, since they are the God's angels. And what is power? Even the power must be defined by God. If the God is this omniscient being that created everything, so what is power in the realm of God? Power must be what God decided it is. So maybe all angels have equal power based on what is need of them. Who knows? But yeah, let's watch one.
These are angels that still exist within heaven, however, the actions and things that they perform are directly to us on earth. Also, information on these is much more scarce in the Christian Bible, so there is a lot more influence taken from things like Catholic saints and the Apocrypha and different stuff like that. Beginning with our first angel in this sphere, or tier, choir, whatever you want to call it, the dominions. The dominions, also known as the dominations or lordships, have a job of regulating the duties of the angels under them. And again, by under them, I mean literally like down, under. This brings up an interesting point that I thought about with researching this. A lot of people have the question of, do angels have free will, or are they a sort of mindless servant that God created? Some are even of the belief that angels used to have free will because, again, Lucifer was able to rebel and try to take the seat of God before he was kicked out, and people believe that after that, God took free will away from the angels. However, the fact that as these angels are described, that they have control and essentially a sort of lordship, I mean, they're called dominions for a reason, over the angels under them, shows that angels have to have some level of free will or choice. Because if they were all mindless servants, then what's the purpose of a leadership role? In most artistic depictions, and again, this isn't exactly true canon of scripture, but there's not a lot to work with when it comes to this tier of angels, they are depicted as having a golden staff in their right hand and the seal of God in their left hand, again like a form of royalty. This is to show that they physically rule over the angels beneath them, as well as carry out the will of God. It's also believed that
See, this is because at the time, obviously, king and everything around king must have been like this. The king and king's people must have this kind of like a royalty behind them, like seal of king and things like that. So the person who's basically writing the books would basically project that, right? So things like this always fascinates me about different culture because it tells you what type of culture they were, like what was happening then, right? If the Bible was written today, I don't think they would have written it this way, right? It were a different structure because anything monarchy related is non-existent. Obviously there are, but it's like non-existent today. Mostly it's democratic based, right? Most of the countries in the world. So that would be really different compared to this, right? The structure of things would be completely different.
Dominions themselves work as a sort of judge. In other words, whenever God rules judgment in one way or the other, it's the dominions who carry out the action. In a lot of their depictions, it's believed that the dominions are summoned or made to act on Earth whenever humans have a very large conflict or battle against each other. So in other words, whenever something like a large-scale war comes, the dominions begin to pass judgment on Earth. It's also believed in some depictions that dominions quite literally have dominion over certain areas of Earth, and many believe that things like wisdom or leadership are imparted on rulers through dominions. They're also often viewed as the bringers of mercy because, they're judges. They don't just do the punishment part, they can also do the mercy part. It's believed by several scholars that it was a dominion who came down to earth and stopped Abraham from killing his son Isaac, which is a whole nother story. Dominions are primarily mentioned by the Apostle Paul in books like Ephesians and Colossians, and it's believed that dominions
Yeah, it's like a pivotal point type of thing, right? Abraham not killing Isaac type of thing. I don't exactly remember. I'm pretty sure I realized that in one of the videos, but I think I just forgot. But it's like a really, pivotal point in this like religious way, right? I don't know what that is, but I'm pretty sure it's something like that.
also have reigns over things like the cosmos and the planets and the stars and everything in the sky. So you could sort of view dominions altogether as the rulers of order and judgment and carrying out God's will. One of the reasons that they're seen as a sort of commander over the angels beneath them. Moving on to our second angel in the second tier, we have the virtues. Virtues are often described as the angels of nature on earth. In other words, they quite literally are the governors over nature and the elements themselves. Again, a lot of what I'm talking about right now is taken from examples outside of the Bible because the Bible doesn't talk about them a ton, so things like the Catholic canon and what have you. It's believed that the virtues are
What the interesting thing is that angels, basically, there's only one God, and everything besides that is just angels. That's how Christianity defines it, right? Like in Hinduism, like there are gods of different sections, but they're also called like gods, God-like being or gods, basically, right? The word is gods. Like there is like the one true God, Brahman, basically the universe itself. Then there's like children beneath there, like three main gods, Vishnu, Brahma, Mahesh, as in Shiva. So this, and then there are like gods below them, like smaller gods and things like that, right? Like this Olympian type of gods, right? Indra and things like that, right? Indra would feel like Zeus in that way, I guess. There's also sun god and things like that in this kind of like a, yeah. So these are all devas or whatever. These are also considered gods. Obviously there's different names, devas and things like that, but you can call it god. In Christianity, it's basically angels. They have these jobs of different type, like the god of nature, god of this. Instead of that, it's like angel of nature, angel of this, like dominions, whatever.
responsible for giving people things like valor and faith, hence the name virtue. And that specifically, whenever people pray to have their faith strengthened or their belief in God strengthened, it's the virtues who carry out this action. Not only that, but virtues are the ones most often credited with performing miracles on earth. In other words, whenever a miracle is to come, it's the virtue who's sent by God to do it. And it's even believed that the virtues have the ability to impart things like courage and strength to people individually, which is why they're often called the name of strongholds. So the idea behind them is that they impart all of the good sort of attitudes or spirits that people may have and are the direct reason for that virtuous spirit. In descriptions of things like the Book of Enoch, they're described as the shining ones. So if you have the fiery ones as the seraphims, then I guess the shining ones are more approachable. And in the majority of depictions, they're shown as having white lilies in one hand and red roses in another. The white lilies to represent the perfection of God, and the red roses to represent the blood or the love of Christ. And with several of the depictions you'll get into with the virtues, people believe that they are led by the angel Raphael. I'll talk about him more in a minute, because it ties back into a bigger theory I'm going to mention with all of these angels, but he is often known as the healer, which goes in line with everything that the virtues stand for. So we have our dominions that act as sort of the neutral judges. We have our virtues that act as the kind and giving spirits, which means we need our punishers, which is where the third angels on the second tier come in, the powers. The powers are quite literally a form of an anti-demonic sentry. They're also commonly referred to as the authorities because the idea is they are the guardians against demonic presence, or in other words, fallen angels. The primary purpose of the powers is that they are constantly in physical war with the demons on earth. The reason, however, that they're still considered on the second tier, which is the tier that resides in heaven and then performs actions on earth, is because it's believed that the powers are the ones who physically guard the border between heaven and earth. In other words, if cherubims are the guardians of the throne of God, then powers are the guards of heaven itself. And because of this, it's often believed that whenever a human dies and their soul goes to heaven, it is the powers who individually escort every soul into heaven, which not only shows that there's a lot of them, but it also further confirms that idea of a sort of sentry figure. However, it's also believed by many that the
8 billion people, right? And if Christianity is to believe there's only one heaven God, right, implying to everyone. Now, obviously not all of them are going to get into heaven, but let's say like a lot of them do, right? The level of people that died, so implying that powers individually, if they're exclusive, which means the powers must be like an army or bigger than army level of numbers. Basically, that's how many powers are there. So I'm going to guess out of all angel, majority of them can be powers just by numbers, right? Kind of makes sense, like your infantrymen type of thing, right? Guards and army against the evil demons, whatever.
powers also have a role in fighting temptation. Or in other words, whenever Satan and the devils try to convince people to do stuff that's bad or try to put their influence over people, the powers fight them off. Because of this, they're often given the idea as giving power to human leaders or just giving power to people in general in order to fight off the wickedness of the devil. Because of their role, they're always depicted as being covered in armor and having swords or bows or some form of weaponry. And not to dumb it down too much, but if heaven was to have a sort of warrior class, it would be these guys. So the second sphere, which is again the angels that are in heaven and interact with man, are the judges of the dominions, the gift givers or positive judges, we'll say, with the virtues, and the protectors or attackers with the powers. So then finally, we have the third sphere, which is the earthly messengers, or in other words, angels that are on earth and directly interact with people.
Okay, what? So a lot of video was like tier 1. Tier 2 lasted very little. Right now, directly tier 3, that's a long one. Okay.
Beginning with the principalities, also known as the princes. The principalities are most often seen as rulers over different areas on earth. The idea is principalities can preside over everything from nations to individual rulers to individual groups and even things like churches. The idea being that one of the primary drives of these princes is to carry out the ministry or make sure the ministry continues on earth. Because of their sort of rule over areas, they're often depicted as having a crown and scepter. Because again, they're seen as a sort of area-centered or at least group of people-centered ruler on earth. And it's believed that whenever groups of people are given specific knowledge or blessings, it's the acts of the principalities. You know how a lot of Christians will talk about being inspired to do art in some fashion by things of God, or they will have these breakthroughs in science where they say, oh, God gave these scientists the knowledge of how to do XYZ thing. This would be the principalities bestowing divine knowledge on man. And it's even believed that they do specific things like give people strength throughout history who needed it. Like, for example, there's a common belief that it was a principality who helped David slay Goliath. You could think of them as direct administrators.
So everything that happened in humanity, every big step, principalities was behind it. Is that it? Like, principalities gave knowledge to Isaac Newton, and that's why he did everything he did, and everybody else like Einstein and all that, right? Principality gave power to the people in World War II so they can stop Nazis. This could apply to a lot of things, huh?
To our section of reality. See, and this is kind of a confusing, bigger overall topic to get to that may warrant a video in itself one day, but concepts like time or notions like days and whatever don't really apply within heaven itself. Like, it's made very clear throughout the Bible that heaven exists separate from our timeline or plane of existence, which is the reason that things like the seraphims and the thrones and all of that exist with God kind of apart from everything else we understand or our linear view of reality. And then you have the second tier angels that while still in heaven, they can interact with the physical world as we know it. these angels are in the physical realm, directly interacting and going through our experiences as people. They're still immortal beings that exist outside of our plane of vision or outside of what we can see and touch, but they're sort of existing at the same time as us, if that makes sense. Hence why they're specific administrators to different groups of people. Now, Paul, whenever he is talking to the churches in his
Yeah, so basically, like there are like if you see two type of plane of existence, heaven being completely different than our universe. Basically, the universe you see a 30, whatever 30, 50, 100 billion light years across, whatever that is, right? So that's our plane of existence, our universe. In that, like this tier 3 people are literally living here in this existence. Tier 2 one is just like can cross over. It's just like I'm guessing the best job of them all. They can be in heaven also here. Why not? Right. So, and obviously the seraphim cherubims are just like in heaven, doesn't come here, has no job here or whatever, so they just live in heaven.
letters specifically mentions principalities, however it's not in a good way. See, remember how I gave my whole theory that Lucifer is a cherubim, and how whenever he fell from grace he took a third of the angels with him that became demons? Well, it's not really specifically said, oh well, like 20% were this kind of angel, 15% were this kind, or whatever, but it is believed that a lot of them were in this third ring of angels. The reason being, whenever Paul is talking to the churches about these evil principalities, he talks about how they are part of the fallen angels and how they have rule over several people on earth. Not only that, but he specifically mentions angels that were mentioned in the second tier, such as powers as well. Specifically, when talking to the church at Ephesus, Paul says, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against the powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." And yes, those words as they were mentioned in the original translation doesn't just mean powers as in like people with power. It's specifically referring to the classification of angel. So we know that some of the fallen angels had to be...
Whoa, really? So even the tier 2 ones like powers, spiritual, I'm guessing that's the word, also virtue ones, so they're literally like, okay, that makes sense in a way.
Powers and principalities. And because principalities, as we know them, have dominion or influence over certain groups in the world, then that would mean the fallen principalities do the same thing, only in favor of evil or the devil.
Yeah.
So whenever you hear people talk...
So Hitler and Nazis got help from the demonic side of principality. Is that it?
talking about concepts of the devil having influence in politics or being high up in world governments, that would be referring to things like the fallen principalities having demonic influence over these certain people. There's even specific mentions of these princes having power in certain regions. In the book of Daniel, a messenger angel, which we'll talk about in a minute, is trying to deliver a message to God from Daniel. However, whenever the messenger angel is on the way, he is stopped by something referred to as the Prince of Persia. And no, I don't think it's talking about the video game character. This is one of the princes that are previously mentioned as being a principality, only this is one of the fallen ones. And it's specifically mentioned as the Prince of Persia, implying that for every good angel that exists over a certain region, there is also one or several bad angels over the region as well. Like mentioned here, Persia had an evil principality over its rule. And the only thing that stopped that Prince of Persia was when the angel Michael showed up to ward him off. So that whole thing, how I mentioned that like the upper two tiers don't...
So that means Angel Michael must be part of the powers because it's their job, isn't it?
really meld with our idea of like location and time. Well, that's evidence that the principalities absolutely exist in our area of time and quite literally certain areas on Earth.
Through Healthify Me, I have been able to regulate my...
After that, on our earthly messengers, we have the second kind of angel known as archangels. So, archangels, as they appear in the Bible, are kind of tricky to talk about. There is only one angel that is ever specifically identified and considered an archangel, and that is Michael. Now, Michael is mentioned several times throughout the Bible. Like I said, he was mentioned in Daniel whenever he warded off the Prince of Persia, and he's also mentioned at other parts throughout the Bible. Like, for example, in Jude 1:9, it's talking about that whenever Moses' body was buried and Michael came to bury it, it says, "Yet Michael the archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moses. durst not bringing against him a railing accusation, but said, The Lord rebuke thee. See, the reason that Michael is so important is because of the overarching timeline of the Christian Bible. So, as a very, very brief rundown, the way time has existed according to the biblical canon is God created angels, he created the heavens, and then he created the earth with the original people on it, Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve committed a sin and were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and then that's whenever death and sin and bad stuff came into the earth. Thousands of years later, God's son Jesus died on the cross so that people could then have a surefire way to get into heaven. And then that gap of time after that is where we're currently at. At the end of that timeline, there is supposed to be a final showdown between God and Lucifer. And in that final showdown, the angel who is to fight Lucifer and win is Michael. And it says at the end, Michael throws Lucifer into essentially a box and locks him up along with all the demons. So the reason Michael is such a huge deal is because he's supposed to be the one to wipe out all of it, which is why many believe him to be the one and only archangel, because the idea of an archangel or an overruling or overarching angel is that Michael is going to be the single one to destroy the devil. Which is why in that scene in Jude, it's very interesting that whenever Michael goes to bury the body of Moses and the devil shows up, Michael essentially says, we'll finish this later. And also, to add another level to it, there are several people that believe the position of archangel was originally that of
But I'm pretty sure like this is Gabriel that is also archangel, right? I don't know.
Lucifer. Now, I can't really find any confirmation or like direct story of this, but from a poetic sense, it is kind of beautiful. The idea being that Lucifer was at one point the archangel, the largest angel and the closest to God. And then whenever he rebelled against God and went away, his replacement, so to speak, which was Michael, is the one who would one day destroy him. And that picture in Jude of the two of them meeting over the body of Moses.
How does that work though? If the archangel was the Lucifer, how is it closest to God if he's supposed to be in the earthly realm? Like archangels are in the earthly realm, as he's explaining that. And if that is like closest to God, how is that the case? Aren't they close to God like cherubims and seraphims?
And Michael telling Lucifer to go away, the Lord rebuke thee. In other words, like, we both know how this story's supposed to end, but for now we'll just part ways. Is so, oh man. Like, say what you want about the Bible. You may not like it. You may think it's dumb. You may have religion, whatever. But if you're listening to the video this long, you probably at least think it's cool. So Michael is seen as the true archangel and the warrior. And in some depictions, Michael's even...
This also gives me the feeling that everything is like, planned. We all know how this is going to end. It's like, it's inevitable type of thing. Which also like scary part comes like, is everything just pre-planned, right? Even the biblical version is like everything's planned, right? That's the one thing I'll gather from all these videos. It's like the talk is always like we know how this is gonna end. It's like inevitable type of thing. So it's just like it's like a play that is being played in some like Broadway or something. This is like a stage play. We all know how this is gonna end. We are playing our part. That's just some scary thing, right? And like I said, one of the scientific scientific discoveries was also like kind of pointing that way, that we might not have much of a choice, which is like panicking, right? When you hear that, it's just panicking, like, well, there is no free will. The fuck am I supposed to do with that?
Viewed as the one who guards the church, and by the church I mean like Christians entirely. However, there's some interesting offshoots people have gathered. So there is another angel that's mentioned multiple times throughout the Bible, and that's Gabriel. Gabriel is the messenger angel. He's the one who goes to Mary and tells her that she's with child. He's the one that goes to the shepherds and tells...
Wait a minute, what? He's not archangel? I'm pretty sure somebody told me, and I'm pretty sure I heard of in one of the other ways, like some media or something, that Gabriel is like archangel. He's the messenger, he's not archangel.
Tells them that Christ is coming. He does a lot of messaging throughout the Bible. There's a specific mention in Revelations when it's talking about the end of times where it talks about the two angels overall and or that's not verbatim, something close to that, and it mentions Gabriel and Michael. So that implies to some regard that they have a level of equality. Not only that, but there's another mention in Revelation where it talks about during the final fight against Satan that there are 7 angels gathered around the throne, one of them being Michael, but that raises the question of who's the other 6. Now, remember that Book of Enoch thing, the offshoot of the Bible that isn't technically part of the Bible? The angel Raphael, which I mentioned earlier as being the head of the virtues, fights a demon on Enoch's behalf and specifically says that he is one of the other 6 who stand between the demons and destroying humanity. Because of stuff like this, and because of people sort of extrapolating different ideas from different contexts of religion, people...
Yeah, I mean, every show and things basically uses this, right? There is like Uriel, right? Okay. Yeah.
have put together the idea that there is 7 archangels. And not only that, but each of the 7 angels have their own specific duty. So to go through them real quick, Michael is the warrior, Raphael is the healer, Gabriel is the messenger, we've covered all of those already, Jophiel is beauty or bestows beauty across the world, Ariel is nature and the natural.
So I guess superficial job, okay. Oh, look at that. But it's just like, war is out. What you gonna do? I'm gonna make everything beautiful. Oh, this is great.
World. Shamuel is the angel of relations, or the archangel of relations. And then finally, Azrael, which is the death angel. Now, Azrael is mentioned as carrying out these acts of God and slaughtering people, and he's referred to as an angel of death, or the angel of death specifically. And then for those who are familiar with Bible stories, during the 10 plagues of Egypt, at the 10th plague, whenever the children of Israel had to put the blood of the lamb over the doorpost, and it says the death angel passed by, it's believed that that is in reference to Azrael. And then different religions, like if I remember correctly, I believe the Muslim religion has 15 archangels. I believe that Judaism has 9. I may be getting those two mixed up. But through the Christian canon, there is one confirmed archangel, with other people believing there to be 7. And despite their quote-unquote low rank, or the fact that they exist in our timeline or through our sense of reality, they are potentially the most powerful angels of all of them. They're all certainly of a warrior class or the ability to fight, Michael especially, and every time you see one of them depicted, they are each very unique and are each even considered, like I said, the angels or saints of these different ideas or different categories. And that whole thing I mentioned earlier, how Raphael is believed to be a virtue and Michael is believed by many to be a seraphim, it gives the idea that maybe archangels aren't necessarily like their own classification or type of angel. Instead, it's a title given to these very 7 important, very 7.
Yeah, I was about to say that this is some of the most important. Doesn't feel right to me because seraphim, cherubims should be the most powerful one. And then I'm like, maybe because of all this like Lucifer thing, this existed after that. Like maybe they were like seraphims or cherubims, whatever, right, closest to God, the most powerful. And God said like, okay, it's your job to fight demon and Lucifers and defeat them. So go to the earthly plane, and they become at that tier as an archangel. But the thing like archangel never existed before Lucifer. They were like seraphims or whatever, right? But God sent their best and bravest warriors, the most powerful one on the earth, earthly realm, basically tier 3, and they became the archangel. That makes more sense to me. So Lucifer being an archangel makes sense because archangel might be the seraphims or cherubims, or seraphims mostly, right? The closest to God, and Lucifer being closest to God, then it would make sense. And all the like how basically people interpret like Lucifer must have been archangel. That makes sense.
Angels throughout the Bible, which has led many to believe the whole thing I said about Lucifer being a cherubim, that perhaps Lucifer himself at one point was an archangel. And then finally, we have the final tier, the most closely aligned angels to man, and that is angels. See, I've been using the word angel to describe everything because that's what we understand them as, but whenever, say, they're talking about seraphim or the cherubim, they never specifically say angel. Like, we think of angels as the beings that God created, to carry out actions in heaven and in earth, and everything that I've mentioned has been that. However, like, seraphim aren't called angels, The thrones aren't called angels. And things like the dominions, the virtues, and all that aren't referred to as angels. The only thing that also gets the title of angel is archangel, and that's kind of cheating. Whenever we hear the mention of the word itself, angels by itself as is, that's referring to its own classification. So these common angels are the ones that most commonly exist around people. These are where things like guardian angels comes in, because in the Bible it mentions that every soul has an angel to watch over thee, and this is the kind of angel it's referring to. Down to the point where it's believed that angels can be charged with looking over a specific individual, or at least for a limited amount of time while they carry out an action. People talk about miracles happening, or you hear the term guardian angel a lot. This is what that's referring to. And it's also mentioned that these angels can put on a physical form and appear as people. So that means that they're so good at blending in, and they're so good as appearing as humans, that they're
So mysterious stranger from Fallout. That's an angel appearing when you need it. Okay. I was about to say that like if their job is to constantly look over us, they're like screwing up in their job, but no, that's not the case. Sometimes they'll be there in key critical moment type of thing.
there are people who exist on Earth who are actually angels, and we're never the wiser to it. The primary purpose of these angels is to serve and protect the Christians or followers of God on Earth. In the Old Testament, there's a person known as Jacob, and one night he has a dream where he sees a ladder going up to heaven, and hundreds of angels going up the ladder and hundreds of angels coming down the ladder, showing that God is working on Earth and they're going back and forth to get messages and what have you. This is where the term Jacob's ladder comes from. Those angels going up and down are this classification of quote-unquote common angel. And they're also mentioned several other times throughout the Bible. After Gabriel appears to the shepherds on the hillside and tells them that Jesus has been born in a manger, whenever it talks about the heavenly host appearing and singing glory to God in the highest, that is this kind of angel. They're all mentioned as having wings, again as their sort of messenger who quickly travels around on Earth. And in the book of Hebrews, it says that there is an innumerable company of angels all about us, which is primarily referring to these. And while I say common angels, and that makes you think, oh, well, they can look like people, I guess they're not that powerful. These angels are incredibly powerful. During one story in the Bible, whenever Lot was trying to escape from a city, one of the
Yeah, like I said, that makes more sense to me that all angels have equal power, but maybe their role dictates how much power they're gonna have. And God, basically, if the God is like God created everything, then what is power? Like I'm talking about the most like as a physicist point of view, like gravity, what is gravity, that type of thing, right? Power, what is power? Okay, so if everything, God created everything, God can define what a power is, and not a God would have control over that. And God's angels are God's basically, let's just say children, tools, or whatever you want to call it. Well, they do God's job. God would basically decide who can have what power based on whatever thing they're doing. So even the simple angels might have a lot of power if need be.
angels simply thought it, and everyone in the city trying to attack them went blind immediately. At another time in the Bible, the prophet Elisha was trying to get out of a city, so God opened his eyes to the angels that were around him because Elisha was kind of afraid at the moment, and he saw legions of armies all about him and was like, oh, I guess we'll be all right. Like I say common angels because there's a lot of them, and from our understanding of the Bible, at least at this point, that's the most numerous that we see, hence the whole common angel thing. But they are still an incredibly powerful being that exists insanely beyond the realms of our understanding of energy or power, all that stuff. Which means that most likely the majority of demons would also be this kind of angel. Now, that's not backed anywhere, that's not some huge thing, but from my understanding, if this is the most common angel, and if a third of the angels fell from grace and became part of Lucifer's army, essentially, then it would make sense that the majority of them are this type. And whenever someone talks about meeting someone who they
That does make sense, right? If the third of the angel fell and they are not this, then I guess everybody's screwed because every other type of angel, like majority of them fell, obviously. And obviously third of them fell. So 33% is like demons, while 66% is like angelic things, heavenly things. Like, is that much of a fight at that point?
literally think is an angel, this would be that kind of angel, as they can appear as human to us and as the Bible mentions, often do so. So all this begs the question, why, right? Like, or also what is our like connection into this whole thing? So you have this incredible, like everything I've described from the seraphims and the cherubims and everything else, all the way down, and then there's a specific class of angel made to guard over us or to help us with daily life or to direct us or what have you. So the question is why, right? Like, what's the purpose? What's interesting about humanity over all the other angels mentioned, and again, this is according to the canon of scripture and the Christian Bible, is that humans are the only beings that possess a soul. See, we see these different tiers or whatever have you of angels that exist between heaven and earth. And while all the angels were created in heaven and then sent down to earth or what have you, humans and souls are the only things that can go upwards. Think about that. Everything else started up high and then was sent low, or when you take stuff like the devil and the demons, they started up high and were cast down low. Humans start low, or with the soul as a true neutral, and then have the ability to progress upwards. So the reason we are quote unquote important enough to require an angel or to have angels guard over us is because the soul that we have is so important because it can go either way. It can go as part of Satan's legion or it can go as part of the heavenly choir. Again, this is the reason that we're so special, that we warrant things like guardian angels. And also, this is a question I see a lot of people pose when it comes to angels, is that of their image. While a lot of artistic imagery of angels has been so heavily butchered, it looks
That makes me question, like, are humans finite or humans are infinite? Like, God just creates infinite humans. If that's the, or humans just multiply and soul gets created instantly as soon as like a human is born. Is that the reason? And if God created a human and the souls are that important, wouldn't God have, like, some other plans in play to increase souls? I don't know. It's just like, okay, so wait a minute.
nothing like
I don't
them.
know.
I'm looking at you, cherubim. There are several angels that are mentioned that look like people. And not just whenever, like I mentioned, the common angels appear as people. Whenever they're in their normal state, it's just like a sort of tall person with wings. So that's another question, right? Like, why do they appear as people? And why does these majestic beings that exist so far outside of our realm of understanding or whatever have the image of people? Well, the reason for that isn't because they look like people. It's because we look like God. And no, I'm not kidding. The reason that humans are so special and contain a soul is because whenever it's described as Adam and Eve were created in the garden, it says that God made man in his own image. Or in other words, God looks like us, or really the other way around, we look like God. And because we're created in his image, each of us sort of exist, again, according to the canon of scripture, as a sort of physical picture of God. So the reason that angels seem to look like humans is because they also mirror the image of God. That's the reason that these creatures that have the powers or in potentially the capability to turn into these multi-winged eyed spinning wheel things or whatever also appear as just humans with wings, because that is the image of divinity. So to put all of that together down on the bottom tier where we exist, and again according to the biblical canon, all of us exist as a soul with infinite potential to do good or bad within the body of something that is made to look like the creator itself, each given our own personal guardian angel in order to ensure the.
Now, first of all, demons didn't existed before humans did, because Adam and Eve was there before Lucifer was cast down. So there was no bad, because there was no demon. But the Adam and Eve had soul. So how did that soul have potentiality to go down and up? Wouldn't that just be up? Or soul was always that kind of flexible. But that's interesting. So God created humans just so they can multiply and become more. Is that it? Like it's like a system type of thing. There can be more and more souls, and they can basically go to heaven or whatever.
Best outcome for our own soul. And that's pretty cool. A lot of people ask questions with this stuff like, okay, well, if angels are constantly protecting over people or can protect over this or what have you, then why do bad things still happen, right? Like, why if there's so many angels everywhere, why can someone still
demons.
commit heinous acts of violence? Well, what's an important detail that's mentioned throughout this is that the one thing that angels cannot do is interfere with humanity's free will. See, like I said, souls have potential to go one way or the other, good or bad. And if there's angels everywhere that are constantly trying to convince people to do good, and if several of the angels have fallen, that means there's demons everywhere constantly trying to convince people to do bad. This can be seen as things as temptations, violence, or whatever have you. So while there is a quite literal spiritual fight between things like powers and demons that is happening in the realm of the spiritual, us on earth have free will to simply follow whichever side that we want to side with. And humans, like I said, have infinite potential for good and bad, and that potential is not put down or silenced by the angels themselves. In other words, people have infinite potential for good and evil. So everything
So did God created all of this? Probably God put something in place where Lucifer would rebel and create demons just so there can be a system where a human might do things based on what human feels, basically autonomy in a way. It's like how we're trying to create AI and trying to make sure the AI has free will right now, right? Like consciousness. God basically did that with humans and created all this system just so it's like a thing now. It's like okay, so this humans, it will based on what they do, whether if they're good they'll come to heaven, if they're bad go to hell, basically creating something like free will. So God did all this just to have creatures with free will. Is that it? Because that would that would tie everything together.
that can occur within that sort of graph can and probably will happen. And the angels, either holy or fallen, exist as a sort of side that we can choose to be on. So think about all that stuff, everything I just talked about, from the cherubims and the thrones and the principalities and the powers and the virtues and the dominions and the archangels and all of that, and tell me that ain't cool. Like, not to, and I hope it didn't come off as that, of like me wanting to beat you over the head with religion or ideas or whatever. Like, this is just me describing research from within the Bible and from within things sort of near the Bible about the different types of angels and how they exist and all of that. And I think it's so neat. And I'm so glad that I was able to talk to you about this. And thank you for watching. Especially like that ending. Like, there's so many people who are curious about the Bible for whatever reason. Either they just think it's cool or they're legitimate.
It's like interesting thing, right? It's a study. I don't understand people not wanting to study or just have curiosity about something. Okay, see, it's like those people, right? People said there is no God and that religion is just wrong. It's just like point blank. Like, the fuck? How do you know? How do you know that God is just not real and all religions just wrong? At best, you can have skepticism. At best, you can be in the middle. Maybe there is God. Maybe there's religion, but I have no reason to think that. Like, even science and scientists, their take is like, we only believe what is like, we have evidence of it, right? Now, religion and Bible, there is no evidence of it. But if there is some evidence comes along in the future that says that there is this God, there is this, we'll believe it. That's science take. Science doesn't point blank say this is wrong, right? There is no science thing that said this wrong, because even then itself is a big statement that science would never do, right? Science of what we have right now, what evidence of we have right now, that's the only thing we'll believe in. Right? Anything is possible, but when it becomes possible, when it has evidence, we'll see it. So the people are just as more idiot who just says like there is nothing, this all wrong, and it just like walks away. Anybody talks about Bible related things or any religion, they just get puff off their cheek, get in anger, just walks away. That's just stupidity. This is interesting. You don't believe it, great, but just out of curiosity, it would be interesting to hear all this. This is why I'm watching all these things. Right, because it's like really interesting how people back then used to think of things, what their creativity was. Is just awesome. And I like in this Christianity, there's like levels and intensity of things. And archangels being cherubims makes sense to me, right? Like, they never existed before demons was a thing. Now demons thing, it's a war. We need archangels, and there you go. These cherubims, the strongest of the if there is such thing as strongest of the God's angels, God sent them down in the earthly realm, and they are archangel now. That makes sense to me. Damn, this was good. Well, if you like my Rick, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.